Okay, greetings everyone. And thanks for coming to this panel discussion on the Flint water crisis, sponsored by the Center for Gender and Global Contexts and the Department of Community Sustainability and our Gender Justice and Environmental Change program that we run out of our Center for Gender and Global Contexts. I'm Ann Ferguson. I'm one of the co-directors of the center. Lisa Fine is the other co-director. Now, some of you are probably aware that the United Nations now recognizes a human right to water. How many people knew that? Hopefully most people do. In 2010, the UN declared that clean drinking water and sanitation are foundational, meaning that they're a prerequisite to other human rights. Everyone should be entitled to sufficient, safe, and affordable water for personal and domestic use. Gender justice and environmental change faculty and students have a strong interest in this issue because women around the world usually bear responsibility for most domestic labor, as we all know, involving cleaning, cooking, childcare, all of which relies heavily on water. In many poor countries as well, you're probably familiar with the fact that women haul water from wells and boreholes and rivers for family use and also for farming. When researchers study water issues, many of them use a gendered lens because it's well recognized that men and women often have different interests and different understandings of water quality, quantity, and affordability. If you're interested in our gender justice and environmental change specialization, please come and see us in Jensen or contact Dr. Wynn Wright in the Community Sustainability Department. And I think we have promotional material, Galina? Yeah, over here on our center. Before we move on, Lisa and I want to thank Galina Ostapau, our office assistant. Where is her? Over there. Oh, there's Galina. Dory Hopkins. Dory, where are you? There you are. And Duncan Tarr, one of our interns in Jensen, who isn't able to attend tonight, for all the hard work they did in organizing the event. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the panel moderator, Dr. Sara Fingal, but first let me introduce her. Sara earned her PhD from Brown University in History in 2012. Her work brings together urban and rural history with an analysis of landscapes and ecosystems in North America. Her principal research interests are environmental history, North American borderlands, social movements, the Great Lakes, science and society, and race and gender in post-1945 U.S. society. She teaches courses on environmental history, and history, philosophy, and sociology of science. And she has a dual appointment in Lyman Briggs College in the Department of History. I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me back there? All right. Thank you, truly, to all of you for being here tonight. And I am honored to be part of this panel, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from each of our panelists. I'm going to introduce the panelists in the order that we're going to go in. One of our panelists is stuck in traffic, so she's going to come in. She's coming from Flint, so she will be here shortly. So we're going to start with Dr. Susan Maston from MSU. Her research involves the use of chemical oxidants for the remediation of soils, water, and leachates contaminated with hazardous organic chemicals. Dr. Maston has been working extensively to develop water treatment technologies that are more effective and suitable for use in decentralized water treatment systems. Over the last year, she has also begun to evaluate water treatment technologies for developing countries and is looking at improving the ceramic water purifiers for pathogen removal. Dr. Masterson, along with several other faculty members, holds a patent on a hybrid ceramic membrane filtration system. She has conducted extensive research on the use of this technology for the control of disinfectant byproducts, nanoparticles, bromate, and pharmaceuticals in drinking water. This process uses the nanoassembly of metal oxides on membrane surfaces. Dr. Maston is well known for her research on the in situ use of gaseous ozone to oxidize residual contaminants in saturated soils using ozone sparging and in unsaturated soils using soil venting. She has studied the toxicity of the byproducts of chemical oxidation processes as measured by gap-junction intercellular communication. Advanced oxidation processes involving ozonation for the oxidation of polychlorinated benzenes, my science students will be really proud of me right now, have been investigated by students in her research group. Work has focused on optimizing these systems for the generation of OH radicals and the development of predictive models, and she is currently testing a few samples from Flint for disinfection byproducts, which is why we are so pleased to have her on this panel, and she's going to give us a timeline for us to better understand what has happened in Flint over the past few years. Next, we have Bishop Bernadel Jefferson, and she is the wife of Lathan, mother of 10 children and a proud grandmother of 9. She is the pastor of Faith Deliverance Center, a community activist, Stand Up for Democracy chair, CEO of Caution, plaintiff against the state of Michigan for Public Act 4, president of Flint Neighborhood Coalition, member of the Democracy Defense, and she is the receiver of numerous awards, including the Sojourner Truth Award. Next, we have Dr. Jennifer Carrera, and she is an assistant professor here in MSU in the sociology department. She has a joint appointment between the Department of Sociology and Environmental Science and Policy program, and she has a PhD in sociology and an MS in environmental engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She also has an MS in biostatistics from Emory University and a BA in biology from Boston University. In 2014 and 2015, she completed her postdoctoral training with the Social Science Environmental Health Research Institute at Northeastern University under the direction of Phil Brown. Dr. Carrera is part of a campus-wide global water initiative, and her area of research focuses on environmental justice issues of access to clean water and sanitation in low-income communities domestically and internationally. Her work examines the role of power and exclusion in the production of marginalized spaces and bodies, using water as a surrogate for mapping power. Her research interests include access to water and sanitation, water quality, environmental health, environmental justice, race and racism, community-based participatory mapping, and citizen science environmental health monitoring. Finally, Melissa Mays, who will be joining us in a few minutes, is from Water You Fighting For? Water You're Fighting For, formed in January by citizens dedicated to uncovering the truth about the water contamination in Flint, as well as in order to help other Flint residents. Melissa and her husband Michael were at the first protest in January, which Dr. Maston will elaborate on in terms of the timeline. And they have not stopped organizing protests, educational meetings, marches, and rallies since then. She was a music promoter and marketer by trade. She wanted to raise awareness about the situation in Flint, as well as empower citizens to oppose Governor Snyder's Emergency Manager program. Water You Fighting For has partnered with Concerned Pastors for Social Action, Democracy Defense League Water Task Force, Caution, and Dr. Laura Sullivan to form the Coalition for Clean Water. They have done everything from filing injunctions and lawsuits to working with the ACLU to figure out who was responsible for the crisis, to partnering with the People's Water Board and other Detroit organizations to organize the Flint Water Justice Journey March. Melissa has also worked with Virginia Tech to conduct 300 citizen tests that helped reveal the high levels of lead in the water. She is currently working with Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha to help educate families on how to heal after this crisis. Additionally, the water crisis remains deeply personal for Melissa. She and her husband and 3 children were all harmed by the copper, lead, and other contaminants in their water. She has also helped to rebuild a website. It's www.wateryoufightingfor.com, where you can find more information about Melissa and her organization. So I always tell my students this, just be sure to turn your phone on silent before we start our next section of our talk. And we're going to begin with Dr. Maston, who's going to give us a timeline of events so we all understand how this came to be.
Just have to get it. And I'm going to ask if I miss anything, do that. Okay? I put together the timeline actually in part for me, because although we've been working on, with a colleague from Wayne State, looking at water quality issues in Flint, it's hard sometimes to kind of get your mind to grasp the whole complexity of really what's happened in Flint. So really what's happened, the whole issue in Flint started back in about 2013 when the city of Flint signed an agreement with a regional water authority to obtain their water instead of from both through Lake Huron, but through Detroit Water and Sewage, through this water authority, okay? And the following day, Detroit Water and Sewer Authority informed Flint that they would not, essentially, they would terminate the contract, but they never said that they would stop selling water. So they were under a contract. The contract was over 50 years old. But Detroit said that they would not renew the contract. In the interim time, there were numerous discussions about the water source. The decision was made by the emergency manager, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
That they would switch to the Flint River. April 25th, there was a ceremony that they would change over. Will they identify the people there? 5 days later, they closed the valves connecting their supply to Detroit Water and Sewer and started pumping from the Flint River. In the next few months, there were numerous complaints regarding the water quality, complaints initially regarding the taste, the smell, the color of the water. The problems continued throughout the summer. There were numerous other incidents, resulted in multiple boil water advisories, notices to the population. Problems essentially then were thought to be microbial in nature. November, the city increases the hydrant flushing. The reason for that is, as most of you know, Flint, the population of Flint is about a third, really, of what it was at its peak, or 2/3 of what it was at its peak. And because of that, the water distribution system is over-designed, resulting in a long water age. This was done to try and improve water quality. Numerous other meetings happen in this time frame. City officials meet with MDEQ. Mid-December, the city receives an official violation notice. This was for regarding disinfection byproducts. These are chemicals, some of which are known carcinogens, cancer-causing chemicals that result from the oxidation of organics with the chlorine. January 2nd, the city releases the violation notice to the public via U.S. mail. That's actually from the City of Flint website. So I'm presuming those dates are all correct. In January, the city issues its first water system Q&A document, which is what's up there. And then a few weeks later, the city issues their first water test letter. Interesting thing about that water test letter, it never says anything about what the problems are other than odor and taste. It never says what contaminants should be tested for. It does tell them that they can collect water, but it really doesn't let the community know what the issues are. February 6th, ABC 12 issues a report about the water quality issues. Again, at this point in time, there really is, as you can see, there's no discussion of lead. It's really related at this point to microbials and the disinfection byproducts. The city signs a contract with Veolia, that's an engineering consulting firm, for review and recommendations, and they, at the same that month, also issue a statement that the trihalomethanes levels are back to levels that are below the maximum contaminant levels, which is the level set by EPA to protect human health. February, the city of Flint tests the water of one individual, Leanne Walters. She was concerned about blood lead levels in her children, finds a blood lead level of 104 parts per billion. The action level is 15. Now the action level is not based, it's interesting because the action level is really based on providing the utility with a guideline of when they need to take action. It's not a health-based. The goal is 0. Okay. In March, they retest water and they find the level at almost 400 parts per billion. The water that was tested was actually filtered and the sampling was done after flushing. Both of those are important, as you will find out later on. In February, the city issues a statement that trihalomethanes levels are well below the maximum contaminant level. By March, things are really picking up, essentially. There's a lot more, there's concern. We've got a technical advisory committee that's formed. A citizens advisory committee is also formed, and the city receives their recommendations from Veolia. The city then reports in June the results of their water testing. They tested 10 sites, again for, for trihalomethanes. Okay. They were below the limit, but there's also a testing of a running average. There's one site that the average is above the 80. And that's actually from their site. My husband noted when I showed him that there was a mistake. There actually is a mistake, but it's on their website. One of the recommendations from Veolia was to install granular activated carbon. Granular activated carbon adsorbs the organic material that would be naturally found in surface water. The goal is, it would also absorb some of the trihalomethanes. The goal was to use that to reduce the trihalomethane formations. They also, in August, they issued a report on trihalomethane formation control concerns. And in that report, they note a number of the problems with trihalomethanes, some of which they note are problems with the Flint River, some of which they note are problems with the treatment or the operator issues, But you can see that there's a significant, especially in 2014, significant incidences of concern. Because of the concern from by the community, Professor Mark Edwards from Virginia Tech, who was very heavily involved in a study of lead in the distribution system in Washington, D.C. that had occurred when Washington, D.C. changed its water treatment system operation. He came up, he did extensive sampling with his students and found significantly high levels of lead in various locations in the distribution system. Interesting to note when I reviewed today, the city of Flint does have a timeline on their site. Many of the dates are actually from that timeline. There's actually no mention of lead. They actually, in fact, their timeline ends right about here. In September, Dr. Mona Atisha releases a study showing that the number of Flint infants and children with elevated blood lead levels has increased significantly since the switch to Flint River water. That same day, actually I think it should be the city. The city states that there's no connection between the blood lead levels and the Flint River. It's not the state, it's actually the city that issued that statement. So I'm going to stop there. Anything I missed?
No, I'll go over and
Okay.
just kind of accent.
We can talk a little bit. I've got some others, but we'll stop there with the timeline.
Good evening.
Hi.
Thank you so much for caring. Thank you so much for having us to hear our story. I want to back up a few years to Public Act 4, which is the Emergency Manager Act. And we got petitions signed, we turned them in, we went to court, and we voted on it as a state not to have an emergency manager. In December of that same year, they had a lame duck and came up with Public Act 436, which eradicated the Public Act 4, what we had voted against. And we began to get emergency managers. Started in Detroit or in Highland Park for the school system, and then Pontiac, Ben Harbor, ended up in Flint, Michigan. And we had an emergency financial manager deals with finances. The emergency manager deals with everything. And we had an emergency manager in charge of Flint, Michigan, which made decisions to sell off many of our goods, to sell off our property, to make decisions against our health, our welfare, and our well-being. The emergency manager decided with our mayor that to go back to Flint River water, which 50 years ago they used Flint River water and it didn't work. And Flint River water was supposed to save the citizens in Flint finances in order so that we could save money for the care of government. Well, from April 2014 to January 2015, we had three raises. 3 raises on our water. Not to mention that the water was not palatable, drinkable, cookable. The only thing that we were paying high prices for water was to flush it down the toilet stool. And it left a ring in your toilet stool. Left a ring in your clothes, it broke out. And not only did it break the children out, there were rashes on their skins, on their jaws, on their neck, internal illness. And they finally sent a letter out in January, as it was spoken. But let me back up. In August of 2014, General Motors was on the Flint water line. And because the water was corroding their parts, they say, we'll give you permission to go back to Detroit water. But the water that was corroding the citizens, keep on drinking and it's fine. Not only that, ironically enough, we have Mission of Hope that provides shelter, bath, drinking water for the homeless. Because the water bills were so high, they end up getting water turned off. Somebody that was helping the community. So not only was the mission without water, but the community, they had a garden that they provided fresh vegetables for the community, which was not able, the people were not able to come in and take their baths. They weren't able to have clean drinking water. Also in August of 2014, we found a mobile home park that had had their water cut off, and they had permission from the cemetery to give drinking water and whatever water that they had, so they had to travel to the cemetery in order to get this water. We worked very well with Detroit, and when the UN, United Nations came in, they came in not only because they had the best water, but they were turning complete streets off, turning their water off. And so we had a crisis, a problem, because water is a human right, especially if you live in the water wonderland, which is Michigan. And so here we have the problem, the crisis. Not only can we cannot drink the water, we cannot cook the water. And Dr. was talking about the boil advisories, but with the TTLMs in the water, you couldn't even boil it because it got in the atmosphere, and it was more harmful to inhale it than it was to drink it. So we had to tell people, don't take hot showers, don't boil the water. And people, not only were they paying high prices for water they could not use, but they had to turn around and buy water in order to drink water, buy water to cook with. And so it became a very big problem. In January, there were quite a few groups, Democracy Defense, Concerned Pastors for Social Action, Water Would Be Fighting For, and other groups that had been fighting. And so we decided to come together and work together, because together we stand and divided we fall. And so we began to work together in March, February or March. Melissa can help you with that. The pastors came to Lansing in order to talk with the governor, to tell him the problems that we were having with the water, that we having water we could not drink. We were having water that was breaking us out. That we were having water that was harmful to our health. We're going to investigate it. We just talked about the 3 raises because everybody understood that the water was coming back to Flint would help in lowering the cost. Well, if it lowered the cost and we had 3 raises, what do you have? And so, then they said that they were gonna look into it, to only say, well, we can't get the numbers released. Because all we wanted to do at that time was to return back to Detroit so that we could have safe, healthy drinking water. And went on, they released the second letter. That, and what we have to understand, river water cannot be stabilized, it cannot be regulated. And they knew that. The chemicals that they put in the water, not only did it corrode the pipes, it corroded the pipes that would, in 16 months' time, it corroded it worth 12 years. So it speeded up the process for 12 years. We lived in it, we deliver water. We helped supply water to the mission, Democracy Defense. We had a separate water group that would go around and help get water. And then we started delivering water wherever we could. Reverend Bullock from Detroit was one of the first ones that gathered together, collected water, and brought over 400 cases of water to Flint, and we distributed. And so we have worked untiringly to make the city know it. And we had a mayor pouring a cup of water and drinking and said, it's fine, nothing wrong with it. I drank it. And we studied telling them, and so in April 2015, we went back to Lansing to tell them that the water had lead in it. Thank God for Melissa and some of the others that had problems with the water. Well, the biggest problem with the lead is that it cannot be filtered through your body. The biggest problem with the lead is it hinders our children from learning. The biggest problem with the lead is that we don't know what all it does. And so there's a problem that we have, and we've been fighting. I get so upset because we're studies saying that there is a problem. It is harmful. It's killing us. And we've had reports of people actually dying from the water, from the chemicals in the water. And they said, the teacher would have said, if you were an infant, a senior, or you had a compromised immune system. Well, how long does it take to get a compromised immune system? If you have surgery, is not your immune system compromised? If you have, we have so many people on dialysis, they have so many heart patients, and so the list goes on and on. And those were the people that immune system was compromised. I talked with the mayor one day, and we had 2,500 signatures asking and petitioning for us to go back to Detroit water. And at that time, the mayor said he went through them and found only about 50 that was Flint residents. And I asked him, how many bad parts did General Motors have to have before you gave them permission to go back to the water system in Detroit? Isn't the citizens' lives more important than an automobile part? We went to court and we found that Attorney Washington filed a petition. First they threw it out. We filed petitions, they threw it out and said we didn't have no case. And many of the times people went to the doctors. The doctors would not co-sign. They say, we know that before the water was changed over, you didn't have these problems. Before the interaction, you didn't have these problems. But I just can't say that it's the water. Right. And so not only were we fighting against the system, we were fighting against the medical, we were fighting against the government, we were fighting so that we would help somebody to hear that we had a problem. And we still fight on, because even with us going back to Detroit water system, we still have infrastructure problems. We still have lead pipes. We still have the corrosion. And we still have our children, our adults, our teenagers, our seniors that have lead in their bodies. And what do we do? Where do we go from here? The governor made 3 decisions in a week. The first one was on Friday. He said, we just gonna pass out filters. On Monday, no, we still not going to. By Thursday, when it came out that the water had lead in it, which he already knew, then we're going back and we're gonna go from here. And I said, no, we cannot go from here. We have to correct the problems. We have to correct the health of our people. We have to correct the infrastructure. We can't just pick up and start from today. You have to fix what has been broken.
Sorry I'm late, I work late.
Also, before we go on, I'd like to acknowledge Nair Sharif, which is the head over democracy defense.
I'm gonna try not to hack my way through that. It's really an honor to be invited to sit on this panel. I'm humbled to be among 2 community activists that have essentially put their lives on the line for their communities. As Sara said, I'm a sociologist. I'm in the Department of Sociology and Environmental Science and Policy program, and I study access to water as an environmental justice issue. And it's actually nice that I'm going after the bishop, as what I'm going to focus on is the sociopolitical dimensions of the Flint water crisis, specifically around the issue of the emergency management system. There are a number of different ways that we could try and look at the social dimensions of what's happened in Flint, but this is a particularly poignant issue. So, while the panelists have extended our timeline a bit, if you look at news reports of Flint, most of the stories about Flint start in April of 2014 when Flint switched back to the Flint River as a water source. And the decision to switch the water system away from Detroit was a financial decision. The Flint officials were frustrated with the billing rates that the Detroit water system was charging. They felt like they were being unfairly assessed fees that included calculations for distance from the city of Detroit, as well as the elevation of Flint. But and so they wanted to move forward in the long-term goal of getting water from Lake Huron. And this switch did take place under emergency management, but the desire of the city of Flint to move to collecting water from Lake Huron did not take place under emergency management. In fact, Flint has been looking at plans to collect water from Lake Huron since 1963. So this has been a long-term vision for the city, and so the relationship to the emergency management structure is complicated. What falls under this issue of emergency management is why did Flint decide in the interim to take water from the river? As we've heard, the Flint River is heavily polluted. It has high levels of sewage in it, high levels of bacteria and contaminants that require significant chemical loading to treat, which then turns into trihalomethanes, which then we get this cascading effect. So the decision the decision by the mayor and the city council to go ahead and move forward with the long-term goal of constructing the channel to Lake Huron took place in March of 2013. And that was under the emergency management of Ed Kurtz. Ed Kurtz was emergency manager of Flint from August 2012 to July 2013, but also from July 2002 to June of 2004. In the summer of 2013, Ed Kurtz signed an order to move forward with the interim plan of collecting water from the Flint River. And there's lots of finger pointing going on right now as to whether or not the mayor and council were aware of that, or that was a unilateral decision by Ed Kurtz. But as the emergency manager, he has that power. Darnell Early, who's gotten a lot of blame for this process, was the emergency manager of Flint from October 2013 to January 2015. So he was the emergency manager when the actual changeover took place. Flint has been under emergency management continuously from December 2011 to April 2015, and during that time frame there have been 4 different emergency managers. You may not think a lot about the emergency management law in Michigan. You may think that this is kind of a standard of practice that's normal throughout the country, but in fact it's not. In 1988, Public Act 101 established a formal process for appointing financial managers in response to the city of Hamtramck's need for filing a bankruptcy. It was for one specific case of financial struggle, an exceptional case. In 1990, that law was expanded under Public Act 72 to allow financial managers to be appointed to any local government within the state, including cities, counties, and schools. That was then extended further by Public Act 4 in 2011, which changed the name to emergency manager, and authority was further expanded. Now, Public Act 4, as we heard, was not popular among Michigan voters, and in 2012, Michigan voters voted it down at the same time that Public Act 72 was being challenged in court. But within 2 months, the Michigan legislature passed Public Act 436. 436, though, contains a clause that prevents it from coming up for referendum, which means that voters may not again vote down this law. So the emergency management law, which is set in an exceptional form to govern unilaterally, now is itself an emergency management structure, because no longer can the public even decide to have an emergency management law. Since 1990, 13 municipalities in the state of Michigan and 13 municipalities and 5 school districts have been placed under emergency management. 10 of those municipalities and all of the school districts are higher in proportion of African Americans than the state as a whole. What was once an exceptional case for a single city has become normative throughout the state of Michigan. And while other states have provisions for emergency managers, the emergency management law in Michigan is the most aggressive and the only one that turns total governance and authority over to a single individual and not at least to a committee. Michigan is serving as a model for financial management for other states. Governor Snyder went on a national tour around the country speaking about how successful this structure has been for Michigan. It becomes increasingly reasonable to suspend democratic processes and introduce dictatorial governance over the city and its services while the condition of the space and its residents decline. Social and political theorists have argued that infrastructure is one of the key mechanisms of organization of the state, of society by the state. Infrastructure is the material form where practices of the state converge with global economy and processes of development. Infrastructure gives physical form to the state, and our relationship with infrastructure through accounts and payments give the state legitimacy. It is in that way that those who are not connected with infrastructure, who are cut out or who leave it through non-payment, are rendered in some way as outside of the state, outside of the expectation of what it means to be a member of society. In instances like Flint, sometimes the comparison is made to a third world country. And usually when those statements are made, It's in a disparaging or essentializing way about what the notion of poverty and deprivation look like. But inside of those statements is an unacknowledged truth, and that is how those conditions came to be. Developing countries throughout the world came to be third world countries not because of backwards practices, but because of global austerity programs implemented by external financial decision makers, including the IMF and the World Bank. If we consider the emergency management structure in Michigan as an instance of state building, we really need to reflect on the kind of state under construction. Another consideration in the analysis of Flint is how the management of the water system represents a form of infrastructural violence. Infrastructural violence is the material way in which structural violence bears out on populations. The concept draws our attention to how cultural and political assumptions are built into day-to-day practices. And we can think of infrastructural violence in two perspectives, from active or passive. What we haven't had the opportunity to hear about so much is the Mark Edwards team with Virginia Tech and the ACLU's efforts. And what they found is specifically how the city of Flint went about accounting for whether or not they were in compliance with EPA regulations or DEQ regulations for lead throughout the city. And so they, through a FOIA request, they found that there was a report that all of these tests had been done. Well, first they had collected a small sample from the city. They were required to, from the population, they were required to sample 100. I think they actually only sampled 39. DEQ said, you need to sample more. But those 39 were in violation of the statute. So the next samples that were collected from were all collected from houses that were on lead service lines as required, and all of them were in compliance. Well, when Mark Edwards actually looks at this, he finds, and the ACLU team looks at this, they find, well, one, the city of Flint actually has no way to tell what houses are on lead service lines. They have a record-keeping system of 45,000 note cards that have the addresses, and that hasn't been digitized, so they don't know which houses are on lead service lines. So that was a lie. The other fact, though, was how they sampled. They were required to resample houses that had been tested as having excessive lead levels in the past. They didn't. They didn't sample from those houses. And they sampled in a very specific area that had already had the line replaced previously. If the assertions by the Edwards team and the ACLU are true, these are deliberate manipulations of data to allow the continued exposure of the Flint population to high levels of contaminants. And that would constitute an intentional use of infrastructure towards the harm of the population. I can't speak to the veracity of that, only that these claims exist. What concerns me more, though, is the extent of passive infrastructural violence and the extent to which Flint represents an extreme case of the degree of harm that can amount through passive means. And passive infrastructural violence doesn't require intentionality, but rather the willful neglect of a population through an infrastructure. And Flint is a bold and clear example of that. And for my other work, I would argue, as is Detroit. One of the really interesting issues around Flint is the negotiation of knowledge and who has the right to make assertions about water quality, whether things are safe, whether these claims are legitimate or not. And there's a strong contestation between residents and activists and city officials, public health officials, and the state. But I want to conclude with a fairly provocative question, and that is, why do we care? And the reason I ask this question is, what is it that's allowed this case to be known? When most of us in this room are thinking about the issue of Flint as being a horribly tragic case of structural violence, infrastructural violence on the population, and with that I would agree. However, I have to ask you, are there the kinds of exposures and health outcomes that we see in Flint not happening elsewhere? Rather, what allowed this case to be known? It was the actions of a vocal and organized coalition of passionate members of the community. It was ties to community organizations in Detroit with an existing legal team and legal strategies. It was the action of a researcher with community members to collect samples and refute official data. And it was the analysis of a doctor who found direct health outcomes on children. And I think, unfortunately, that that's really important in this case. Because children are a charismatic population, and there are specific legal protections in place that are actionable with the violations that happen towards children. And would Flint have switched over to the Detroit water so quickly, at least, without being able to demonstrate a specific health outcome on children within Flint? And I would guess not. I would guess that we would still be fighting this battle. So I'll stop there. And I'm excited to hear your answers.
Very good job. I apologize for coming in late. My name is Melissa Mays, and I run What Are You Fighting For? It's one of the grassroots community efforts to basically expose the truth and make changes on our own, since we obviously had no trust or faith in our government, and this is just from starting out. Obviously, the emergency management law is ridiculous. Several times, the emergency manager told us that we were stupid, we were liars. He was doing what was best for us. We had no say anyway. And the change would never happen. Everybody would laugh at us and say, these things aren't going to happen because it's under emergency manager. You have no say. Even though it's really funny because I live here, I pay my water bill, I pay my taxes. It's great. How I personally got involved was actually, it was in January. We already knew that there was issues with the water. We thought the switch to the Flint River was a joke. People would say, oh, we're going to the Flint River here next year, and we would all laugh because we're like, there's bodies in there, that's funny. You know, we're not gonna drink this, there's no way. And sure enough, it was put back a week because the MDEQ did not approve the disinfectant system, so they put it off a week. April 25th, our mayor pressed the button. So on we went. Most people almost immediately discovered their water changed colors overnight from clear to god-awful brown, orange. Our water had started turning yellow at times and smelling like rotten eggs. At other times was a bright, pretty blue and smelled like bleach. And we would laugh and say, well, it looks like a pool, might as well smell like one. Find out later from Miguel del Toro that that was straight copper. We were bathing and drinking, and yeah. The sad part about it is most people who had the brown water had no idea how at risk they were, because that's iron. That's iron that's showing up in their water. Lead has no color. However, iron attracts lead. So all those people that had the discolored water holding their jugs up at all of these disasters of a meeting, I would label each community meeting as train wreck number 1, train wreck number 2, because they would tell us we couldn't ask questions. The emergency manager would tell us to sit down and shut up. Nobody would let us speak. There was one meeting that we went to where they had these giant sheets on the wall, and we were to write out on Post-it notes what our questions were and put them in the proper category of health, billing, safety, and we'd have to wait to see if they would address our questions. They always threw mine aside. We'd ask questions with the TTHMs. Okay, great, it's really bad for you to drink. What about inhalation? What about absorption? I began protesting. It was there was a protest that was coming together because our bills had already become so unaffordable by the first 8-9 months. And then, surprise, in the mail, we get this little folded over piece of paper that's addressed to resident, which, mind you, renters didn't get it, half of the homeowners didn't get it. You open it up in this little nondescript piece of paper, and here it tells you that for the past 9 months, we had been in violation of the EPA's Safe Drinking Water Act for total trihalomethanes, which are carcinogenic byproducts of the chlorine, like I'm sure that you guys have covered. It's chloroform. So you've been drinking, and by this time we had been blowing up Erin Brockovich's page. Somebody had given her my email and phone number, so she got a hold of me and had me start working with Bob Bocock, who's a 30-year water treatment expert. And so I sent him everything I could get my hands on. I lied and went to the water plant and said I was a student and got raw water data I wasn't supposed to have. And it showed that the 3 E. coli boil notices we'd received the previous summer, it's not the only time that we had high levels of fecal coliform, which is poo, in our water. It went on the whole rest of the year, and they just did not tell us. So here we were boiling our water thinking we were safe. The scariest part is those 3 times we were boiling the water, the TTHMs were the highest. Boiling TTHMs, as well as other contaminants such as lead and copper, condenses them and releases them into steam. And when you breathe it in, you absorb it through your lungs, it goes into your system faster. You can absorb like copper and certain other contaminants through your feet in a bathtub, in the shower. So here we are in danger, having no idea what's going on with us. During that time, this is summer of 2014, I had started going to the gym, thinking I'm doing the right thing for myself. Started drinking 1.5 gallons of water a day, because our water wasn't brown at that time. Every once in a while it would go yellow, but then it would go away. So I'm like, okay, well at least I'm not as bad off as a lot of these other people. I can't afford to buy bottled water because my water bill at that time was about $480 a month. So I'm like, I'm just gonna, I'm paying for this, it should be safe, they're telling us it's safe. So I'm drinking my water like, an idiot. And my hair started falling out. I had rashes on my skin. My hair fell out in handfuls. And my grandmother's native, so I've always had long, thick hair, and it would just come out the root. And that's wonderful. Just a great thing. I'm like, well, maybe I'm 36, maybe it's old age, I don't know. So maybe it's stress, maybe it's all these things you don't think of. And then in December, I had developed an upper respiratory infection that lasted for 6 weeks through 2 Z-Packs. And the odd thing was every time I coughed up phlegm, it tasted like bleach. So I had gone to the emergency room. By this time, my bones were hurting, which was the oddest feeling. I had no idea what was happening to me. I would have a 103 fever, and I would complain, and he said, my doctor would tell me, is this muscle soreness? I'm like, no, my bones hurt. I can feel my bones. Number 1 sign of lead poisoning. Had no idea. So the lead was already spiking in 2014, almost immediately with a switchover, because the water was so caustic, it was tearing up everything along the way. So January I'd had enough. I'm like, I'm still sick, I don't feel well. Here this letter's telling me it's safe. Contact your doctor though, because all of our doctors are water experts, of course. So I'd had enough. We paid $1,200 across 2 months for water bills across Christmas. It ruined Christmas. I'm like, no, we're gonna go protest. I've had enough of this. So we started to protest. We went to meetings. There was the Dome meeting, which is just a historical failure if you ever want to look up the January 2015. People were getting arrested out of these meetings because they were crying. They had, I'd gone to a meeting at Antioch Baptist Church, and they were on their hands and knees crying and begging the emergency manager and the mayor and anyone who would attend, the director of public works, please stop this. You're killing my mother. You're killing us. Please stop. And just watching these people cry and watching them sit up at their raised table with absolutely no concern for the citizens whatsoever. But if you didn't pay that bill for unsafe water, you get shut off. Your home gets condemned, they take your children. Right. So we had no option. Everybody says, why didn't you stop paying your bill? I wouldn't pay it. Well, I didn't want to lose my children. Because what they tell you is that if you do not have access to running water in your home, you're putting your children at risk. You're endangering your children. Even though the water that's coming through that tap is what has endangered the children. Speaking of which, I have 3 sons, all of which who have lead and copper poisoning. And it's unbelievable to me that I was being that good mother and telling them as they're outside running around the summertime in the heat, their cheeks get red, drink water, baby. I don't want you getting dehydrated. They don't drink pop. They've never had caffeine. Drink water. I don't want you drinking all this sugar. You're out there running around. Drink water. Drink water. Not knowing that I was poisoning my children. Not knowing that I was paying the highest price in the nation to poison my children. So as I found out more, I didn't find out how sick I was until March. We didn't find out that we had lead and copper in our water until April. And then we found out that all of us had lead poisoning. I also have lupus, antiphospholipid disorder, Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I have several autoimmune disorders because my body's basically flipping out on itself because the lead has broken up into my system and is now in my brain, my bones, my teeth, my blood cells, same as in my children. I found out today that they're finding odd signal, there's abnormal signal dysfunction or something in my brain from the MRI. So the lead is interrupting the neural signals in my brain, causing me to have tremors, seizures, all sorts of fun things. 37 years old. I've never smoked, tried to be rather healthy. My water did. That's great. So what I was realizing was that this was bigger than we thought. It wasn't just a couple things here and there. This is scary. So I had met Leanne Walters at the Dome meeting when he was telling her she was also stupid and a liar. I had met Naira. We had been protesting. All of us had met along the front lines. And as odd and weird as our lives are, we're all connected now. And we're like this little family because through working as this coalition and a family, we got the word out across the world. We screamed at the top of our lungs. We did every single interview from everybody that's crawled up under a rock from across the ocean. Anybody that would be willing to listen, we would talk. The city and state would come back and say, they're ridiculous. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what this is. They're just trying to stir it up. And actually in those FOIAs, I was really happy to see Brad Werfel refer to us as people that were just trying to upset people, those groups. And so it tickled me to know that I probably ruined part of his day. So that makes me extremely happy. We had several meetings in the governor's office with him sitting across from us, and he's just lucky I didn't come across the desk myself. Because he laughed at our situation. He sat there and laughed. That was a fun day, wasn't it?
Yes.
Sat there and laughed at us and told us that, you know, you have no reason to worry. Relax, Flint, there's not a lead problem. Not knowing that we had already been in contact with the EPA and Professor Edwards and had already had a plan to start testing. We had already mapped out, we had asked for volunteers at this point. We had over 500 volunteers. We whittled them down by zip codes. And we went out ourselves and we got those 300 test kits out and we collected 277 of them back. They said that we made all sorts of history with that. But by this time, we'd already stirred up with all of our protests and our marches and our rallies and our educational meetings that we held on a consistent, constant basis. We'd stirred up enough questions and interest and rage in the people as they were seeing their water bills climb and their kids get sick, to where they came up and they said, I want you to test our water. And sure enough, everybody, I don't think there were any tests that came back with no lead. Not all of them came back with copper, so that was a very fortunate thing. People that had tested with the city and had none detected lead, came back with 15, 35 parts per billion. Several different people, the city had sent them a test, but we found out that they were lying on the test. The MDEQ and the city of Flint together lied and covered all this up because they didn't want to trigger a notice. They didn't want people upset. Funny thing is, we have Google. We can look things up. We talk. We have meetings. They didn't expect the citizens of Flint, as downtrodden as we are, to actually stand up against the government and say, no, 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 this is wrong, we're sick of this. So we're tired of paying all the bottled water, we're tired of you lying to us, we know that you're lying. My 11-year-old son called the mayor out as a liar at the debates. You know, I mean, when a child can tell you that you're lying, when you're saying that the water is safe and that you care about the children, and you hear his little baby voice that he still has say, if you cared about us, why did you poison us? It's heartbreaking, it's infuriating, and it makes me a proud mother. I'm like, I did that. So knowing that there's kids that are scared of their tap, the damage, the emotional damage that's been done through this is just unbelievable. I'm sitting there washing pots out in my sink, and if a puff of steam comes up, I duck back like I've just been shot at. That's ridiculous. My kids skip taking baths because they'd rather be stinky than get sick. My son said that on camera. He'd rather be stinky. My oldest, he's 17 years old. He's got holes in his teeth because the lead has made his teeth crumble from the inside out. Those aren't his baby teeth. He's going to have to get dentures. He is 17 years old. Our middle son, he's 12 years old, fell off his bike, fell over. His wrist buckled. He has 2 buckle fractures on his wrist from falling off his bike because his bones are so brittle because of the lead. The lead seals off your bones and you can't absorb nutrients anymore. Our youngest, all 3 of them have anemia, but he's the worst. His white blood cell count won't go above 4. He's catching every single thing that anybody sneezes within a 3-mile radius. He's constantly sick. They're constantly tired. They're constantly complaining of bone pain. And why this has happened? They wanted to save $2 million. Well, good job. Because as of Monday, we nailed the city and the state individually naming from Governor Snyder all the way down with 2 federal lawsuits. One's a class action lawsuit where they're going to have to pay for damages to our homes, to our pipes, to our hot water heaters, and also have to pay for all the health damage that's been done. We've been encouraging people quietly, to get their blood tested now for months because we knew this was coming. So it's on record. And our plan is to get the CDC to come in to do an epidemiology study. Close enough. That's the lid. No, so that way we can prove that all this has happened. Because as of today there was a conference in Arlington, Virginia. Leanne Walters was there to speak. They want to get rid of the lead and copper rule. They want to loosen it and get rid of. This is big utilities, not wanting to spend the money to test, not wanting to get in trouble for having lead in the water. Had a gentleman actually say, it's not a big deal. Lead's not the worst thing that can happen. So we sent Leanne Walters. Her lead By the way, the EPA max is 15 parts per billion. Her lead at her highest was 13,200. And the scary thing is we only tested, out of nearly 100,000 people, we only tested 300. The city won't test people anymore. We don't know how bad it is all across the city. So we hit them with a class action lawsuit on Monday to pay for this, and a future medical monitoring fund for all of these kids, because they tell us that the scope of the lead poisoning might not be seen for 5 years, which is unacceptable, completely unacceptable. It's irreversible. These kids are never going to see their full potential because we have no support system in Flint. We barely have an educational system as it is. So we don't have the special education, the support services, the behavioral support services that are going to be needed because of the lead. We also hit them, the National Resources Defense Council, the ACLU, Concerned Pastors for Social Action, and myself also hit them with another federal lawsuit. It's an intent to sue under the Safe Drinking Water Act, saying you do what's right. You do your jobs, you monitor this, you change this, you do the right testing, stop doing the pre-flushing, the loopholes that you found, follow the proper testing protocol set forth by the EPA, or you're going to get it, or you're in trouble. We are telling you that you need to have federal oversight to watch over the city and state, because they obviously cannot be trusted. So the reason we're doing all of that is because we're an hour away from fresh water, yet we have poison still pumping through our taps. All because somebody decided it'd be a good idea to save money. If that can happen here, if it can happen in Flint, if it can happen in Michigan, it can happen anywhere, and it already is. There are only 11 states that follow the EPA's testing protocol. That's terrifying. So we have no idea how bad this problem is across the US, so we're gonna do everything we can to take our disaster, man-made disaster, and make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else at any other time. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I believe now we're going to take some questions from the audience. Have our microphone coming?
So since we're recording this, we have a microphone. So if you have questions, raise your hand and I'm going to come to you so that we can get your voice on the recording.
Thank you very much. A couple of quick questions. And maybe a comment. You know, the flushing sampling has been a long time policy in the state of Michigan to do that, but with drinking water wells, not municipal systems. So I don't know if that's come up yet, but the whole flushing protocol goes way back to the Department of Public Health to sample water wells, not municipal systems. The idea being to bring in fresh groundwater before you sample it. Secondly, during the NAACP case against Angler with the incinerator on Carpenter Road, it was proved that there was already elevated lead levels in Flint children. And there are additional sources. And I'd like to hear some comments about if the overall picture has become part of this fight, and it should. Because you already started at a lead deficit in that community, and that information has been vetted, improved, and litigated, and it's all out there. And then lastly, the current situation, granular activated carbon does not remove lead, you know, reverse osmosis. So some comments about these things, the current situation?
As for the children's blood lead levels, when Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha came out, what she did was she got our research from Professor Edwards and the zip codes that we had tested and compared the blood lead levels of children through routine Medicaid testing. Before the switch and then after the switch. And what she had found was that in some areas, in one area, the children that had elevated blood lead levels, the number had tripled. And so she took that information, across the average it had doubled, the number of children with the high lead had doubled. She took that and then she matched it with the highest zip codes that we tested so they could correlate very strongly that it was because of the water. And yes, unfortunately, we already, because of the contamination in our air, in our ground, and just the economic situation that we're in, we already did have kids with high lead levels, and now that's just doubled and tripled, which is terrible.
And that was in our favor that we had, because they had already tested. And that's why the health department was testing at that time to check to see where the lead levels was. Back in 2013, the health department got a grant in order to check the homes for the lead paint because the older homes had been painted with lead paint and the kids were scratching it or what, even inhaling it. And some of them, they were able to go in and clear it up, and some of them, they had to put them up in hotels in order to remedize the problem of the lead paint. So that was a plus, that we had evidence that where the lead levels was. And even at that, they tripled 3 times. My group cautioned citizens advocating united together to inform and organize for new direction, work with the health department in 2013 to help define the homes and to help to be able to go in and test for the lead poisoning from the paint. But this is totally different, and it was consumed even the faster because they internalized it daily.
And the point of exposure filtration, can you comment on that? You know, first of all, it's immoral, and secondly, it isn't effective.
I mean, the filtration will work for bacteria. I assume actually I don't know, I know very little about the filters that they're putting. But I'm assuming they're probably ceramic filters, so they will remove bacteria, they will remove viruses, they will remove particulate material. So if the lead is absorbed to the particulates, it will remove the lead. If the lead is dissolved, or if and basically anything that's dissolved, it's not going to remove.
There were some filters that was not doing the people any good. And then when Virginia Tech came in, my seamstress, the lady that does my sewing for me, her lead levels was the highest in the city. It was the highest in the city. And so they came in and they retested her water and brought the zero water, so that you run it into a pitcher and filters that. And so, you know, they have made provisions for it. And so you're right, there are some tests that does not do the work, but they are working. And so now they have begun to pass those out free of charge in the city. And one of the problems is those that have the filters, because of the lead content that's coming through the pipes, the filter has to be changed so often, whereas I think it's supposed to last 3 months, and it might last 3 weeks on our pipes.
With the granulated activated carbon, with that, it's installed in the plant, and it was supposed to fight TTHMs, to help lower the TTHMs. Everything that they've done has been ridiculous because they'll fix it at the plant. The problem is in the delivery system. The lead isn't coming out of the plant. The caustic water was coming out of the plant. It was 20 times more corrosive because of chloride, all the overchlorination, and all the chemicals they're adding to an already chemical soup. Just tore up all the leads, solder, welds, pipes, and it tore up the biofilm that had built up over 50 years that protected the water from the pipes and the pipes from the water. Another little funny note was that the water had flown in one direction for 50 years, and they didn't realize when they did the switch they were going to have to switch directions. So it was tearing up the biofilm, which also is full of Legionella, which is being released into the water, and there's Legionnaire's disease that could kill you. We have 8 times the national average of Legionnaire's patients in McLaren Hospital, which is horrifying. There's been 4 deaths. So then with the carbon filters, they were supposed to help the TTHMs and lower those. That's not helping. People are still getting tests back right now that their TTHMs are 100 or 120 parts per billion, and it's supposed to be 80 or less. It shouldn't be. None of these things should actually exist in our water whatsoever. The fact that we have these, maximums, they're ridiculous. That doesn't mean because you've got 12 parts per billion you're safe. Not at all. But yeah, so they put in a $1.6 million filtration system, and nobody saw a difference in their water. The TTHMs are still high because the organic compounds that the chlorine is interacting with that cause the TTHMs are coming from all the broken mains, all the lines, all the stuck valves. At this point in time, what they're doing to deal with the broken mains that are just gushing out of the ground, there's some asphalt on it. And you know, you're watching we have sinkholes in our streets now because they don't fix them. They can't fix most of them. So they throw asphalt on it, which then again, of course, sinks. So yeah, so that was a waste of $1.6 million. They should have addressed that. They should have had that in to begin with because nobody doesn't have those filters in their water treatment plant. Also, our water treatment plant still uses lime for softening, which is unheard of as well. So, way to go, Flint. The water treatment. But
Lime for softening is commonly used.
it's coming out still through our pipes. That's the problem.
Oh,
If they're supposed to scale it
I
back.
just wanted to, lime for softening is commonly used.
It's coming through people's taps, so they were told to stop it. They were told to change the way that they soften the water. But they were also told by the EPA 2 weeks ago to stop flushing hydrants, and they're still doing that because all it's doing is stirring up all the contamination in our pipes. So we still got lead water. We're still gonna have that. But,
So, I'm sorry, Bishop Jefferson, I was going to introduce
Naira.
Naira. Is that okay? Or do you have another comment? Or?
No, it was a hand in the back.
Oh, okay. Okay, we're going to hold the question just really quick, and we're going to have Naira Sharif, who is the leader of the Democracy Defense League, say a few comments, a few words.
I'm just going to stand up over here in the corner real quick. But it's hard when people like Naira is the leader, because the Democracy Defense League, like, we're very egalitarian. We have everyone has different roles, and I send the emails and take the notes and design a lot of the stuff. But thanks, this is a wonderful and powerful panel. And I know like everything that I could have said has already been said, so I'm going to limit my comments to stuff that has not been said. So I'm not, unfortunately I came late, but Democracy Defense League, we actually started as an organization in December 2011, because December 1st we received our emergency manager officially. And we decided that as we were all like collecting signatures to repeal Public Act 4, and Bishop Jefferson was the chair of our local organizing committee, we wanted to specifically come together as a group to confront the emergency manager, because we felt it was an affront on democracy. And so we did that in a variety of different ways, through like educational forums and inspirational and theatrical protests and other stuff that may be on the edge of legality, but a variety of different ways to confront it. And we were interested in the water because, one, it happened under the emergency manager. We were interested in the cost of the water because we paid one of the highest rates in the nation, the quality of the water, and soon after the switch, people were breaking out, like their hot water heaters were breaking down, and all these things were happening. And then the persecution of people for quote unquote stealing water, because that was another thing that was occurring. So we have a high renters population, and people in Flint, you have to, I want to say it's $350 deposit if you are not a homeowner to get your water turned on. And so you would have landlords that said your water's included, and people would be paying their rent and their water wasn't included, their water was on illegally, and so now their homes, they're getting kicked out of their homes because they've been stealing water, and then they're facing prosecution because quote unquote they've been stealing the water. And so those were the three things that we were focused on. And I'm not sure if I know that they talked about the quality losses, but there are also there's a couple of cost losses that are in play right now. They're viable lawsuits. And so that's happening to confront on that level, and we have the quality losses. And specifically with this whole thing, this is kind of like a what not to do. Like if you ever go into municipal or state government, this is a what not to do, like how not to handle a crisis. Because when you have the kind of like crisis management 101, you do not have the head of a department that's creating the crisis run the meetings. Like you just don't do that. But yeah, we had that, and that was kind of why we had like some of these disastrous meetings and there was lack of customer service, because this is a preventable crisis. This is a man-made crisis, and it happened because you had bureaucrats and accountants that were more interested in a budget than people's health. So even though we now have Detroit water, like, we're still not safe. We're still under a public health emergency. We still have people who do not have filters in their homes. But we have a warehouse full of the filters that the governor, in his infinite wisdom, which the first message was, learn how to live with this lead in your water. Just hold on, and then once you get this pipeline built where you're going to have Lake Huron water, and then you can kind of mosey off to sunset. And so this was something that did, and as things escalated, like there was character assassinations with everyone who confronted. It wasn't a culture of inquiry and curiosity and trying to handle a situation. It was a culture of just disparaging people and trying to squash dissent. And so that's how you do not handle a crisis. You don't do that, ever. So one of the things that we're doing now is we're working to, on top of all of the other stuff, like at the grassroots level, is to make sure that people are educated, that people are, at least have a filter. There's, like, I don't have a long street. Like, my street is maybe like 20 homes. And one of the other things, I know Bishop Jefferson was talking about the lead, and you, sir, had mentioned the incinerator. I actually grew up right across the street from, like, in that neighborhood where the incinerator, which is still operating, which is in another municipality, which is kind of like how it all even got built. But getting people to have filters and for them to be educated in how to eat, which is, you know, like, in the midst of everything, you know, like Flint has a food desert and all these other, you know, these other things that have a negative impact for the social determinants of health, but trying to ensure that we at least kind of heal, because I don't think that there's not going to be real healing until there's justice, until there's people sitting in jail, until people are being fired. On Monday, we had our Department of Public Works head, who was an appointee of our first emergency manager, Michael Brown, in December 2011. He resigned Monday. So hopefully he's the first of many that's going to resign. They're at the state level, at the local level, and at the federal level, they're calling for investigative hearings into this. And so hopefully, because we do not have a culture of openness and transparency in Flint, everything has been, all the knowledge that we've gotten is tooth and nail we have to fight for, through FOIA requests, through our allies at the ACLU of Michigan, and I am a board member of the local branch, the Flint branch for the ACLU of Michigan. But like through our allies like Kurt Guyette, who is investigative reporter for the ACLU of Michigan, and he was actually hired to specifically write about the emergency manager law because there has been a media blackout with the emergency manager law. And if it wasn't a public health emergency where we finally got to the tipping point where it's international news, now we can start to have this dialogue again of what emergency management looks like in the culture, in the social construct when we talk about us in our government in those sort of societal relationships. And I think I'm gonna like stop right now because I know that I know that there's many more questions that need to be had, and I know I have a tendency to ramble, so thank you.
More questions?
Thank you all for coming all the way down here to tell your story. It's an important story. It's a national story. I think everybody in the state of Michigan cares about this because infrastructure problems Flint are probably replicated through a lot of communities across the state. We're all wondering about the lead levels in our pipes, probably. But I have two questions. One is, did you have local allies like the Mott Foundation or University of Michigan, Flint, And University of Michigan, Ann Arbor has always been really pretty proactive in Detroit in public health. I mean, they've been working against contaminants with community groups for 15 years, and they have a pretty good track record. So why weren't they an ally, or what happened there? What about
I want to say.
or other? I have two questions. Like, so could you name the kind of allies that you could rely on and who you couldn't rely on? And the second thing is, I mean, it sounds like Flint is another Love Canal. That got adjudicated in part because it was a private company and you could have insurance money that would end up paying through a lawsuit. But in this case, the lawsuit is public, agencies. So how's this going to get paid for?
Well, to go to your first question, no, we had no allies. We approached several, we went to U of M, they came out in February and said they had high lead in several of their buildings. None. There's the answer. We tried, we go for it. Good. She's gonna do a better job than I am, because that.
And then the allies, why Nair was getting it, you're looking at 4 of them right now.
There we are.
And because we addressed the Mott Foundation, we addressed the governor, we addressed City Hall, we addressed the county
Numerous
commissioners,
times.
we addressed the health department. And so therefore, it's not that we did not attempt and that we did not try, and it was because of the money. And they study said that the water was fine, that there was no problem. The water was going down, and every time they pushed the emergency manager to say that, well, if you agree with these points, and I am one of the signers of the lawsuit against the state of Michigan because of because of the emergency manager law, Public Act 4, and so that lawsuit is still alive and well. Many of them, there were 2 others that have filed lawsuits against the state, and they failed for various reasons. But I'm here to say today that ours is still standing. All 9 counts that we applied for, we didn't get all of them, but we're going to readdress it because of the evidence that have came forth, because of study fighting, study pushing. So the allies are those that continue to fight, even when those in power, those that were elected to do justice for us, to fight for us. And I found out yesterday that the county commissioners was the ones that was supposed to push the health department to address the problem of safe, healthy, clean water.
Okay, so I used to work for U of M School of Public Health, and in Detroit it is more, I would say, environmental issues, and in Flint their focus is more youth violence. But when it comes to allyship, as this whole thing, yes, the C.S. Mott Foundation did contribute money to go back to Detroit, but as I would say, this whole fight in the quest for clean water, the institutions were mostly on the side of the city and the state. So you would have one of these disastrous meetings, which was the city of Flint had organized the Water Advisory Committee, and there was a lot of the institutions were a part of that committee, but the intent of the committee was to be an echo chamber and a rubber stamp machine for the city's narrative to get out into a larger community, and it wasn't necessarily a two-way conversation. So you would have like the United Way, our area action agency, which is GCARD, like the health department, the CS Mott, a lot of the philanthropic foundations in Flint, which is the CS Mott Foundation, the Roof Mott Foundation, the Community Foundation of Greater Flint. I think there's another one, but I can't remember. No, that's it. So you would have like those organizations, they would sit on there, but they weren't really, I would say, like in the streets with us, or would like let us use like information And like even like the information at the health department, finally they've designed something specifically for lead exposure through your water, but for the longest time it was still using the narrative that, you know, which is the number one way outside of this incident, which is exposure through lead paint.
As for the class action lawsuit, we feel very strongly that we're going to prevail because this is, I mean, it's in violation of our constitutional rights. So their governmental immunity, what they want to call it, the Constitution trumps that every single time. So I think we're going to be fine there. As for the money, the state has plenty of money. I would like to say that I hope we go after the MDEQ's budget since they did this to us. So that's one of the aims, that's one of the targets anyhow, since they allowed this, they actually went out of their way to, a laugh that we get a lot is that here they are, this big conspiracy to, you know, defraud the water testing, to defraud citizens, to hide the lead from us, and they email from their work emails. So I find that hilarious. This is 2015, and instead of picking up the phone and trying to hide it, they email. So we have all those emails, and seeing as how they said, yes, send us 31 more tests, and they better be low. And they didn't even get that, so then the MDEQ lowered the amount of tests they had to turn in. And threw out some of the highest tests for reasons that made no sense. Otherwise, it would put them out of compliance. So since the city and state, again, the city, they keep saying that they're broke. However, they take $4 to $6 million a month in on water bills. So there's money. It's just what they're doing with it is putting forth to that new pipeline, the Carragandi Water Authority, to privatize our water. We are all against it. Nobody's actually voted for that. We don't want it. The setup is awful. It's 70 miles of untreated water. Usually you treat the water at the source as soon as you pull it in. We have it'll travel 70 miles before it has to get treated at our water plant, which obviously has done a bang up job here, before it's sent out through our crumbling infrastructure. So we don't want that. We want to be on Detroit. We want to stay on Detroit. We've actually seen today, one of the reasons I was late, I was supposed to be at work, I was actually protesting in Detroit in the rain with our sisters down there and brothers that are fighting the shutoffs. So I spent my day down there because we watched, as we pulled off the Detroit system, we watched the Detroit people have to pay higher bills because our mayor and our city council and emergency manager thought it was a great idea that we save money. So how else do you quickly take out two cities? Right there. They lost $20 million a year in revenue. We lost clean water. So great job there. Yeah, so hopefully the money is going to come from any of those places, and there's several, I think there's 14 different defendants, so they can go ahead and get them checkbooks out, pay these kids for their futures.
I think that there's probably people in the audience that are thinking, well, you know, this is a horrible crisis, and what can I do? And I think that the what can I do question is really about political engagement. Because I think you're right. I think that DEQ is probably going to be, you know, plenty of fingers and plenty of justified fingers pointed at DEQ. But DEQ is the environmental regulatory body for the state of Michigan. So when we defund the environmental regulatory body for the state of Michigan, what does that leave us with? So, you know, when we look at EPA, and EPA is complicit in these issues around the country, and we sue EPA, that's who we have to sue. But we're in this cycle of decreasing federal funding, decreasing state funding for the very entities that are meant to protect us. And so if we end up, you know, if DEQ ends up being the fall guy for all of this, which is unfair but probable, not unfair in that it's unfair that they're the only person, the only entity accountable for what happened. You know, you look at the amount of funding that's you know, the efforts at decreasing funding throughout the country for these kinds of resources. So, you know, housing and urban development, their budget, right now Congress wants to, they're at $120 million a year. Well, that sounds kind of big, I guess. But the amount of money that it will cost to repair the infrastructure in Flint is $1.5 billion. So that's not very much money that HUD has to start with. But that's for, you know, that's who the entity that we would go to do lead improvement efforts in houses to replace fixtures and get rid of lead paint things. And they want to reduce HUD's budget by $35 million. The CDC lead program in 2011 had a budget of $29.2 million, and in 2012, that dropped to $2 million. Let me give you some perspective on $2 million. There are faculty on campus with startups that big. There are. $2 million is McDonald's money in terms of resources. That increased in 2014 to $15 million, but it was still half of what it had been only a couple of years earlier. And those are the resources that our federal entities have for doing blood testing for kids throughout the country. And so, you know, this is a false dichotomy to say that, you know, we can't hold these entities accountable, and that, you know, that if we hold them accountable, then we lose those resources. We need to be putting more resources into DEQ and EPA, and being able to allow our government to be able to enforce and hold industry and industry partnerships accountable to providing the resources and health that we expect society to have.
Just a question and a statement. The question is, for that lady sitting next to you, how do we compensate her child that may not be where he should have been if he had not gotten lead poisoning? Now, to the lady in the back that asked what agencies did or did not help, the Mott Foundation owns 2 water companies. Now, this pipeline is being ran from Port Huron to Flint. Nobody heard anything about anybody saying, I'm not getting paid enough for my property cross-through rights. Why? Because they were bought probably 50 or 60 years ago. Thank you.
I take that as a rhetorical question.
Hi, my name is Ajane. I'm actually from Flint. I came here for school, but I've only been hearing about what's going on in Flint through word of mouth by family members. And I have a 18-month-old niece who's been very sick lately, and I'm very concerned about her health as that relates to water. Infants drink a lot of water, and they need to bathe every day. But my biggest concern is what is being done for the people who don't have access to health care to get their children tested. Because my sister, she's not on Medicaid, but she also doesn't have, she works at McDonald's. And as you guys know about the job situation in Flint, she works 4 hours a week, which making minimum wage, she can't even pay her own bills. And she has a child. So she can't afford to spend $250 to Hurley Hospital to get my niece tested for lead poisoning. So is there anyone doing anything to address that issue?
Right now, one of the things, find me on Facebook because I did a video of the proper testing and the tests that you need to do because of the fact that she's probably been exposed almost your niece has been probably almost exposed almost her entire life. She needs to have her lead levels checked, but there are other tests she needs to have as well to see the damage and to try to get an idea of the extent of how long this lead has been in her body. But there's a video at the very top, pinned at the very top, so you can write down information and also ways to start trying to break down the lead. There's certain ways that you can eat, things you can take to try to fight the lead in your body, to try to fight what the lead is actually doing to your body, because left in there on its own devices, it's going to damage everything that it goes through. It's a neurotoxin, so it's very, very important. So talk to me afterwards and I'll make sure that you get the video. The county health department is doing free testing for kids ages 5 and under. The reason I look the way I do when I say that is because they do finger prick testing. The finger prick testing is actually not for long-term exposure. The CDC says that finger prick testing is done in case you just were exposed, like you just ate lead paint or you just drank water the first time. Lead levels are highest in your blood the first 48 hours after initial exposure. After that, the lead starts to break down and go into your body. That's why they're going through doing the finger prick testing for school kids, because they're like, oh, you're only a 3. Oh, you're only a 0.8. See, it's not that bad. But they're not testing for anemia and all the other problems that you can see with children who are growing. Like in my 12-year-old, you can actually see lead lines in their x-rays that show continued long exposure. So these are tests that she needs to have done. Tell her to get a hold of the health department. And then I know that we are working with the Michigan Nurses Association to try to work, set up a day of action to work with labs. We're still needing help and funding for this, to provide people who don't have insurance access to free testing for their lead levels, as well as the anemia and the other tests needed.
And also, you could either go down to the health department because they have certified application counselors, or she can go directly online at healthymichigan.org, which is the Medicaid expansion program. So if your niece is 18 months old and your sister is only working at 4 hours a week, they're eligible to be under the Medicaid expansion. So then she could go to my children's health center to be seen, and they can facilitate some of those tests.
Also, first I want to applaud you and your group that donated water to us when we were down here protesting water, women forward. And if you name your group again.
It's
Simigan Sorority. And also G-Card. If you would go to G-Card, they will give her a filter, the zero water filter, to help filter water. So there are different groups. You just have to begin to search to see the difference. So those are some of the things that you can do right away, she can do right away, is to get the filter the first thing, go to to get the child tested. And so those are some of the process that you can begin.
Unfortunately, we had a media blackout as well, as much as we tried. And of course, we were up against our own mayor going on TV, drinking a glass of what he said was Flint water, saying it was safe. We had organized a Detroit to Flint march, and that was ending up in Flint on July 9th. July 9th, he sat on TV, drinking the water, saying it tastes great, it's fine, it's safe. And that's what a lot of people have. If they don't have the internet, they don't have access to Facebook, they don't, most people don't even really watch the news. That's what they're seeing. Their trusted officials telling them it's safe. That's the scary part about all of this, is there are a lot of people that were drinking the water all the way up until October, and people that are still using it in their coffee pots thinking that's safe. So we are running up against a lot of misinformation, and that's been the hardest, biggest, most burdening part of what we're doing, is just education, to try to help people protect themselves and their families.
Hi, it's great to be here. My colleague Michelle Solly and I are both from the University of Michigan, Flint. My name is Suzanne Seelig, and I'm the director of the Department of Public Health and Health Sciences there. And I've lived and worked in Flint for 35 years. I live right downtown, so I guess I'm as much victimized by this as anyone else. I can't speak for the University of Michigan, Flint, in terms of what their response was. We do have a department of occupational health and safety that's run by Mike Lane, and I know that we have alerts that are on our website, and I know that our chancellor Sue Borrego has been somewhat involved in the community. We had an environmental health program at one time, but we no longer have it. But we also have faculty member Marty Kaufman, who's a hydrologist on our faculty, who's really very, very knowledgeable. So I can't speak in defense of the university. I don't know that perhaps we could have been a more active partner in this early on. But I do know that there's alerts that go out to the university community. But beyond that, what I'd like to say in response to Jennifer is, so what can we do about this, right? And one of the things that we're doing in our department it's starting at U of M Flint. Our winter term is like the MSU spring term, right? So we start in January. We'll be teaching a course out of our department on the Flint water crisis, and it's going to be held at the Park Place, which is in North Bank Center, and we're holding it there so that I suspect that there'll be relatively few students who are going to register for this course for credit, because students at U of M Flint don't have a lot of extra money and they tend to only take courses that are required. So my guess is that the enrollment in this course is going to be low, but the way we're setting it up, it's probably going to be between 5 and 7 p.m. in the evening. We're going to do it every other week. And North Bank holds about 80 people. And so it's going to be totally open to the community. And we're going to be inviting several of the people that are here tonight that don't know this yet to be involved in our course. We want to have panels of at least 2, if not 3 people for each session, providing different perspectives on this, and definitely making it mostly open for the community, so the community can come and hear about not only what they can do now, but the complexity of the problem, because some of the folks that are on the planning committee, like Yvonne Lewis and Kay Dorr, and have been feel really, really strongly that we want to be able to, as a university, right, based in the city, what can we do to help to educate our citizens about how to address and understand these problems, not only just the water problem, but the other problems that we face in our urban environment. And so I think, Jennifer, I really resonate with what you were saying about the political engagement, and that's part of, we want it to be the education about what they can do about water, but we want it to go further than that, and trying to influence anyone who comes to these sessions about what they can do as an engaged citizen, because I think that's really what the role of our academic public health department should be. And so I'm thrilled to be here, and Michelle and I actually obviously drove from Flint to be here to meet all of you. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
To piggyback on what you said also, one of the things on Sunday morning, the churches have the biggest audience and the biggest listening ear. And so the Concerned Pastors for Social Action, we came together to bring all the groups that were fighting for the same thing. And that's what happened so many times. There's a lot of people fighting on the north, south, east, and west, and they never come together to pull their forces together. And so the information that we disseminated was because we came together and we were able to help a bigger group of people.
And I hope you'll help us with our efforts. It needs to be a continuing, it can't just be a one. Is Brian Molina, was he involved with you on that?
No.
I had an educational meeting at his church.
We have a question in the back.
My question is about Viola. They have a reputation for being kind of scandalous, and I was wondering how they've interacted, been an asset or a hindrance toward to you.
Oh, goodness. When Bob Bocock came in for free and I worked with him for about 3 to 4 weeks before he caught him. He came in February 13th of this year, marched with us, but met with all of our city officials, went toured the water plant, and gave his full evaluation for free. 100% said, you're in violation of the lead and copper rule. If you don't have a lead and copper problem, you're gonna, he was right. As well as to address the TTHMs, all the problems. To fight against what he had done, the emergency manager, Ambrose, at that time, decided to spend $40,000 of our water money to bring in Veolia to tell us all the things that we should do. But our water's okay. It seems okay to them. What they were actually doing, what we found out from an insider who worked at the plant, they were valuing our water treatment plant because they wanted to sell it, they wanted to privatize it, and then attach it to the privatization of the Carigati Water Authority. The rumor was, the value before our infrastructure got completely destroyed, was $600 million. The bond value, the loan, was about $400 million. So there's about $200 million to profit off of selling our pipeline and our water treatment plant. So to fight back against that, we did all the digging we could to get people to, and we fought against the fact that they paid $40,000. The report that they gave at a public meeting was a disaster. It was everything that Bob Bocock had already printed off, except several things that they wanted to up the chemicals in our water, actually up the ferric chloride, which the byproduct of that is hydrochloric acid, so fun, we just need that in our pipeline. And they just sat there like deer caught in headlights when people basically verbally attacked them and asked them questions. And they're like, well, we were brought in here on a very small scope, and that small scope is sitting in my Dropbox right now, which is how they plan to take over the water plant. Thankfully, we had some good people who worked inside the water plant that helped make that stop and leak that out. So yeah, we have to do everything we can to keep their hands off of our water, because every single city that has been privatized, and even in Europe, the problems that they've had, Ireland with Veolia and Affinity and all the different names that they're under, Vivendi and all these great things, it's bad news. Yeah.
And one thing a lot of people don't know, that once the water is privatized, there is no accountability. There's no test, no mandatory test, and there's no results that have to be shared with the community. And so, if we allow them to privatize our water, where it was exposed, you know, they took longer than what they were supposed to. They took 9 months to expose it, but if it's privatized, there's no accountability.
Well, we all know like Veolia's playbook, which is like come in, you know, like do their dazzling act and take over the water system. That's something that we still have to be mindful of as we transition into this new water authority, so we don't, I would say, fall by Detroit with the Great Lakes Water Authority, which basically, like, you know, they're managing it, and that could still, I would say, happen. That could possibly happen in the future, but that's something that we have to kind of beat back and expose, and hopefully this continued stuff, because I mean that could still happen, and because like our infrastructure is crumbling, like that had to be put on the back burner. But after we get like our infrastructure like repaired and all of that stuff, like they could still come back in. And with this whole emergency manager law, that's also part of the playbook, is come in and sell off private assets. And that's what happened in Pontiac, and that's what happened in Benton Harbor and in Detroit, and it could still happen in Flint.
Hi everyone, this is a bit of a question, comment, announcement. So the Gender Justice and Environmental Change Program through Jensen likes to arrange a field trip once a year about. A few years ago we went to Detroit, working with Detroiters working for environmental justice and the greening of Detroit, and did their toxic tour. This past spring we went to Southwest Michigan to look at migrant farm worker issues. And we're really interested in maybe looking at the Flint water crisis this spring. So the question is sort of for some of our Flint activists, if we can contact you about maybe arranging something. Okay, and the announcement is to all of you, if you're interested in continuing this conversation and investigating and supporting this issue, keep in touch with us, get on our listserv, or let us know that you're interested.
In which university? I'm not clear.
Michigan State University, okay. Jensen,
Center for Gender and
Global Context.
Okay.
We're one floor right below here, right
yeah.
here. We can work with you on that.
Okay, great. I have required.
Thanks. That's where we are.
So if no one else has questions, since it's right around 8 o'clock, we'll have this be the last question if everyone's okay with that.
Well, in that case, I better change my question.
Make it a good one.
Okay, just sincerely, if no one else has done this, I am so sorry for what you all are going through, and really apologize on behalf of whoever I can apologize for that this is happening. I grew up and worked in Saginaw, Flint, Bay City growing up, and this to me, you know, the long history of all the injustices, it's like the last straw. I can't believe it. I'm shocked. you know, and I have been reading about this a little bit, but trying not to know much about it. I was involved in litigation on the incinerator and worked with Janice O'Neill and Lillian Robinson, and you know, but I haven't been looking at Flint in a long time, and I'm really sorry. Now, my students know that I'm a downer, so let me ask this question with that caveat. Trihalomethanes are implicated in you know, miscarriage and spontaneous abortion. I would like to ask the difficult question about any women's health issues, if any, that have been, if you could.
There's a lot. Actually, Dr. Mona today had told the EPA that she's actually now gathering information because there have been so many late-term miscarriages, early births, stillborns, just an unimaginable amount that you're hearing about from young, healthy people. And a friend of mine, her niece passed away after she only lived 30 days. She was so premature, and they didn't know why. Between the lead and the TTHMs, it's terrible. And the instance of bladder cancer in women right now is sky high. The unfortunate part is a lot of people don't take a great care of their health. They don't have great health insurance. They're not getting the checks that they need, which is why we're pushing so hard that people get checked for everything, because between the lead, the copper, aluminum, tin, E. coli, TTHMs, Legionnaires, we're getting hit from every direction and every aspect of our total overall health. PTSD is going to be sky high for the fact that people, myself as a mother, I feel an unbelievable amount of guilt that I did this to my kids. I handed them the glass of water. I know it's not my fault. My brain's telling me it's not my fault, but my heart's breaking every time my kids have something wrong with them. Every time somebody tells me, because they call me, I make my number public, they send me pictures, they tell me, oh my God, I just got my water tested. It's 139 parts per billion. Oh my God, I just got back from the doctor, the lead in my blood, the lead in my urine is 11. I mean, it breaks my heart because we screamed to all the way up to our congressmen, our senators. We begged for help. We said there was a problem, and they let us down. So yeah, unfortunately, when people talk to me, don't feel bad. People are either extremely grossed out by all the things I have to say, or they get angry, or they get sad and apologize, which is great, because on a final note, I just want to make a note that not one agency that did this to us, not one elected official that did this to us, has ever said, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what's happened to you, even if they don't want to take responsibility for what they did. Not one of them has said, we are sorry to the children, we are sorry to the families, we are sorry for what you have to go through now and in the future. So thank you for that.
Well, on that note,
sorry.
No. No. This is an ongoing conversation.
Yes.
And this, we hope, is just the start of continuing collaborations and discussions all over Michigan. So we just want to thank everyone on this panel. Thank you all for staying here and for being here tonight. Thank you so, so, so much. Let's give everybody a round of applause.
The trip that we're planning in the spring. It will probably be on a Friday in April, and if there are any costs associated with it, it would probably just be for your lunch. So if you might be interested in that, send an email to gensen@msu.edu. That's GENCEN@msu.edu. And we're going to make a little listserv of people who are interested so that when we get the details for that, we can just send everyone an email with all of the information. And then if you're available to come, you can just let us know. So thanks, everyone.